The community dojo's charity exhibition had drawn a crowd of 200, mostly there to watch tech billionaire Julian Voss, net worth $1.8 billion, eighth Dan Black Belt, a rank held by fewer than 60 practitioners in the entire country, demonstrate technique before the evening's fundraising pitch. Scanning the room for a volunteer sparring partner, Julian's eyes landed on David Reyes, a warehouse shift supervisor sitting quietly near the exit with his 7-year-old daughter. Julian smiled and extended the invitation as a joke as much as anything. A billionaire against a man in a $14 thrift store G. David stood, rolled his shoulders, and answered without hesitation, "Only if you promise not to cry." The room laughed. Julian did not expect the sentence to be prophetic. Julian had built his cybersecurity firm from a $30,000 seed loan in 2009 into a company acquired 13 years later for $2.4 billion, making him, at the time, the youngest founder in the firm's sector to exit above 9 figures. He'd trained in Aikido for 22 years, treating the discipline as the only part of his life that couldn't be optimized, delegated, or automated. He funded this exhibition personally. $85,000 of the evening's proceeds went towards saving the dojo from closure. Not from loneliness exactly, though he hadn't shared a meal with anyone outside his executive team in 11 months, but from something closer to nostalgia for a version of discipline money couldn't buy back. David, 41, had held a 6th Dan rank himself, 2 full grades below Julian, but a level fewer than 1% of practitioners ever reach, before quitting competitive Aikido 8 years ago, the same year his wife died of sudden cardiac arrest at 34, leaving him to raise their daughter, Nora, alone. He hadn't stepped onto a mat competitively since her funeral. The warehouse job paid $19.50 an hour, a fraction of what his old sponsorship deals once offered, but it let him pick Nora up from school every day at 3:15, a trade he'd never once regretted and never once explained to strangers. The moment David squared his footing, Julian felt something stir that he thought had gone dormant years ago. Not fear, but recognition. David's entry stance carried a specific asymmetrical weight distribution, unique to one teacher's lineage, Sensei Thomas Ferreira, who had personally certified fewer than 9 students to 6th Dan or above across a 40-year career before his death 5 years ago. Julian had trained under Ferreira's senior student for a decade. David, it turned out, had trained under Ferreira himself, directly, for 12 years, starting at age 14. Time seemed to stand still for the first exchange, not because either man overpowered the other, but because both instantly recognized a shared vocabulary almost no one alive still spoke fluently. David's counter to Julian's opening grab used a 1987 variation Ferreira had never formally documented, teaching it only to students he trusted to never use it competitively. Julian tapped out within 40 seconds, not from pain, but from the sudden, disorienting certainty that he was standing across from a piece of his own lineage he didn't know still existed. The exhibition's actual cause hit harder once Julian learned the details mid-conversation afterward. The community dojo hosting the event was the same building under new ownership since 2015, where Ferreira had taught both of them, Julian on Tuesdays, David on Thursdays, without either ever knowing the other trained there. The building faced foreclosure over $210,000 in accumulated debt, a fraction of Julian's net worth, but an amount the current owner, Ferreira's widow, had spent 3 years failing to raise through fundraisers, netting an average of just $6,000 each. Julian offered to clear the debt outright. David, still catching his breath, said, "No, not out of pride, but because he'd watched money solve problems before without solving the actual one. Nobody was left to teach the next generation Ferreira's specific lineage, the asymmetrical entries and 1987 variations that existed nowhere in writing, held only in the bodies of the 9 students Ferreira had certified before his death. Clearing debt kept the building standing. It didn't keep the discipline alive. David proposed something Julian hadn't considered. Instead of a donation, a paid instructor position, 3 evenings a week, teaching Ferreira's full curriculum to any student regardless of ability to pay tuition, funded not as charity, but as a formal 10-year endowment structured so the dojo's survival never again depended on a single fundraiser's turnout. Julian agreed within the hour, transferring $210,000 to clear the debt and establishing a $1.2 million endowment projected to fund David's position and 40 scholarship students annually for the next decade. Nora, watching from a folding chair, saw her father step onto a mat for the first time in 8 years, something she'd only heard about in stories from adults who used to know him before her mother died. She didn't fully understand the lineage or the endowment structure. She understood that her father, who spent evenings tired from warehouse shifts, still had an entire skill inside him he'd never once mentioned, and that a stranger's request to Spar had somehow given it back to him. Julian had $1.8 billion and an 8th Dan rank most practitioners spend a lifetime chasing. Yet he'd walked into that dojo lonelier than the warehouse supervisor he'd casually challenged as a crowd-pleasing gesture. The lesson isn't that wealth lost to skill, or that humility beat arrogance in some tidy morality tale. Julian was never arrogant, and David was never bitter. It's that mastery, real mastery, isn't measured by rank or net worth, but by what a person quietly keeps alive without an audience for 8 years, waiting only for someone who spoke the same unspoken language to ask.